What if Vladimir Putin's greatest challenge isn't coming from Ukraine, but from a region inside Russia itself? Not from missiles, not from sanctions, not even from the battlefield, but from a political system built around a single man. A system that has kept one of Russia's most volatile regions quiet for more than 2 decades, and a system that may soon face its biggest test. If you followed the war in Ukraine, you've probably heard about Russia's military, its economy, or its diplomacy. But there is another front, a quieter one that receives far less attention, yet its consequences could reach far beyond the Caucasus. Today we're looking at why Chechnya still matters, how one regional leader became indispensable to the Kremlin, and why uncertainty surrounding his future has sparked questions about Russia's long-term internal stability. If you enjoy deep geopolitical analysis that goes beyond the headlines, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and let's begin. To understand today's situation, you have to go back more than 20-5 years. When Vladimir Putin first emerged on the Russian political stage, Russia was still recovering from one of the most turbulent periods in its modern history. The Soviet Union had collapsed. The economy was fragile. The military had suffered repeated setbacks. And nowhere symbolized Moscow's loss of authority more than Chechnya. Located in the North Caucasus, Chechnya is small in size, but enormous in strategic importance. It sits between the Russian heartland, the Caucasus Mountains, and vital transportation corridors connecting Europe, Central Asia, and the Middle East. Historically, the region has experienced repeated conflicts with Russian rule, stretching back to the 19th century. During the 1990s, those tensions erupted into open warfare. The First Chechen War ended with Moscow failing to fully re-establish control. For many Russians, it represented a national humiliation. When the Second Chechen War began, the political stakes were much higher. For Vladimir Putin, it became more than a military campaign. It became the moment that defined his public image. Projecting strength, restoring state authority, and rebuilding confidence became central themes of his leadership. But military force alone did not stabilize Chechnya. Moscow also relied on local allies. Among the most important was the Kadyrov family. Initially involved on the separatist side during the earlier conflict, the family later aligned itself with the Kremlin. That decision fundamentally reshaped Chechnya's political future. Rather than governing the republic directly, Moscow increasingly depended on a local leadership that could maintain order while remaining politically loyal. It was a practical arrangement. The Kremlin provided financial support, security guarantees, and broad autonomy in many domestic affairs. In return, Chechnya remained firmly within the Russian Federation. After the assassination of Akhmet Kadyrov, his son Ramzan gradually became the dominant political figure. Over the following 2 decades, his influence expanded well beyond ordinary regional leadership. He built powerful security institutions, consolidated political authority, and developed an image of absolute control. For Moscow, this relationship solved an immediate problem. Instead of deploying massive federal forces indefinitely, the Kremlin relied on a trusted regional partner. It was a model based on personal loyalty as much as formal institutions. That distinction matters today, because systems built around individuals often face uncertainty when leadership changes. In many countries, political succession follows clearly established constitutional procedures. But in systems where authority becomes closely connected to one personality, the transition can be considerably more complicated. Questions begin to emerge. Who inherits political influence? Who controls security forces? Who maintains relationships between competing elites? These questions are rarely answered overnight, and they become even more significant in regions with long histories of clan politics, local rivalries, and complex power networks. Recent reports and public speculation surrounding Ramzan Kadyrov's health have therefore attracted international attention. Many of these reports remain difficult to verify independently, and official statements continue to reject claims of any serious illness. Nevertheless, the discussion itself has become strategically important, not because of confirmed medical facts, but because analysts are asking a broader question. What happens if leadership eventually changes? That question extends beyond one individual. It reaches into the structure of governance itself. For years, Chechnya's political system has operated through a combination of formal institutions, personal relationships, security organizations, and financial support from Moscow. Changing any one part of that balance could affect the others. Succession planning, therefore, is not simply about selecting another regional leader. It is about preserving stability across an entire political ecosystem. Observers have pointed to the increasing public visibility of younger members of the Kadyrov family, as well as trusted political allies, as possible signs that future leadership structures are being considered. Whether these developments represent ordinary political preparation or something more significant remains open to interpretation. But they illustrate an important reality. Power transitions rarely begin on the day a leader leaves office. They usually begin years earlier, through appointments, public appearances, institutional reforms, and the gradual redistribution of influence. For the Kremlin, maintaining continuity in Chechnya has always been a strategic priority. The region borders several sensitive areas, contains important transportation routes, and occupies a critical position in Russia's southern security architecture. Instability there would have consequences extending far beyond local politics. This is why many analysts argue that the real issue is not simply who becomes the next leader. The larger question is whether the existing political model can function without the individual around whom it was originally built. Because modern states are strongest when institutions outweigh personalities. When that balance shifts, even orderly transitions become more complicated. And nowhere is that challenge more visible than in regions where security, politics, and personal loyalty have remained intertwined for decades. But there is another layer to this story, one that is often overlooked. Leadership is only one part of political stability. The other part is control, and in regions shaped by decades of conflict, control ultimately depends on institutions capable of enforcing authority. For years, Chechnya has maintained its own powerful security structure. Although these forces officially operate within Russia's broader security framework, their identity has long been closely associated with the regional leadership. That distinction matters. In many political systems, security organizations answer primarily to national institutions. In Chechnya, personal loyalty, regional identity, and institutional authority have often existed side by side. As long as those relationships remain aligned, the system functions. But during any leadership transition, those relationships can become far more complicated. The question is not whether these forces would suddenly become unstable. The more important question is how quickly a new chain of command could establish unquestioned authority. History shows that succession is rarely only a political event. It is also an organizational challenge. Command structures, budgets, appointments, and personal networks all have to adjust simultaneously. Even in stable countries, that process takes time. In regions with more complex political histories, the challenge becomes even greater. That is why analysts continue watching developments inside Chechnya so closely, not because conflict is inevitable, but because uncertainty itself changes political calculations. At the same time, Russia continues to devote enormous military, economic, and political resources to the war in Ukraine. Every government has finite attention. Every state has limited administrative capacity. Managing one major strategic challenge is difficult. Managing several at once is considerably harder. Throughout history, great powers have often discovered that external conflicts become more complicated when internal questions begin demanding equal attention. This does not automatically produce instability, but it forces governments to divide resources, leadership, and political focus. That broader context explains why developments in the North Caucasus receive attention far beyond the region itself. For Moscow, Chechnya has never been simply another federal republic. It has represented a model demonstrating that local stability could be maintained through a combination of political autonomy, financial support, and personal alliances. For years, that model appeared successful. Violence declined. Large-scale conflict disappeared. Federal authority remained intact. But every political model eventually faces its most important test. Not while its architects remain in power, but when leadership begins to change. The challenge extends beyond Chechnya. Russia is home to numerous republics, each with its own history, identity, and relationship with the federal government. Most remain politically stable, yet each also observes how Moscow responds to changes elsewhere. Political decisions made in one region are rarely viewed in isolation. Regional elites pay attention. Local governments compare policies. Questions of autonomy, representation, and federal authority are constantly evaluated through the experiences of neighboring regions. That does not mean similar outcomes automatically follow. Every republic has its own circumstances, its own political culture, its own relationship with Moscow. But precedent matters, and governments understand that perception can sometimes influence politics as much as reality. Meanwhile, the international environment adds another layer of complexity. The Caucasus has always occupied a strategically important position between Europe, the Middle East, and Central Asia. Major transportation corridors, energy infrastructure, and security interests intersect throughout the region. As a result, any significant political transition naturally attracts attention from neighboring countries, as well as global powers, not necessarily because they seek confrontation, but because regional stability affects economic, security, and diplomatic planning far beyond Russia's borders. This is why discussions about Chechnya often appear alongside conversations about Ukraine, European security, energy markets, and the future balance of power across Eurasia. They are connected through geography, not necessarily through direct causation, but through strategic interdependence. So where does all of this lead? At the moment, three broad scenarios appear most plausible. The first is controlled continuity. In this scenario, the Kremlin successfully manages an orderly political transition. Existing institutions remain intact. Security organizations continue functioning without major disruption. Financial support continues, and regional stability is preserved. This would represent the least disruptive outcome, and perhaps the one Moscow would most strongly prefer. The second possibility is a more difficult but still manageable adjustment. Leadership changes could produce temporary political competition, elite bargaining, and institutional restructuring before a new balance eventually emerges. Such transitions are not uncommon in political systems built around long-serving leaders. They create uncertainty, but not necessarily instability. The third scenario, while generally viewed as the least likely, is also the one attracting the greatest international attention. If competing political networks, security institutions, or regional interests fail to coordinate, the transition could become significantly more complicated. Such a situation would place additional pressure on Moscow at a time when its strategic attention is already divided. Whether that pressure remains manageable would depend on decisions made not only in Chechnya, but also in Moscow. For now, there is little evidence that any single outcome is predetermined. The future will depend on institutions, political negotiations, economic resources, and the ability of regional leaders to maintain public confidence during any eventual transition. That uncertainty is precisely why this story matters. It is easy to view geopolitics through the lens of tanks, missiles, and front lines, but history repeatedly shows that governments are often shaped just as much by succession, administration, and internal political stability. Sometimes the most important battles are not fought on the battlefield. They are fought inside institutions, inside leadership circles, and inside the systems that determine who holds authority when one political era comes to an end. For more than 2 decades, Chechnya has represented one of the most distinctive political arrangements inside the Russian Federation. Whether that arrangement can successfully adapt to future leadership changes remains one of the most important unanswered questions facing the region, because the real issue is no longer simply about one individual. It is about whether a political system built around personal authority can successfully evolve into one sustained by durable institutions. That answer will shape far more than the future of Chechnya. It may also influence how Russia manages internal stability during one of the most strategically challenging periods in its modern history. And perhaps that is the biggest lesson of all. The future of nations is not determined only by the wars they fight abroad. It is also determined by how successfully they navigate change at home. If you enjoyed this deep strategic breakdown, let me know in the comments what topic you'd like to explore next. And if you want more long-form analysis that goes beyond the daily headlines, be sure to subscribe, because the next chapter of this story may be written long before it appears on the evening news.